There's a strange moment that happens when you're trying to make your first $10,000. You can work for months and still feel like nothing is happening. You make a little money. Then something goes wrong. A bill arrives. A client disappears. Your laptop breaks. You spend what you earned. And suddenly, you're back near zero. It can feel like the number 10,000 is sitting somewhere far away, almost behind glass. You can see it, but every time you get close, something pushes you backward. Then, years later, something changes. The same person who struggled to make their first 1,000 can suddenly make 10,000 faster than they ever thought possible. Not because they became 10 times smarter, not because they discovered some secret business model, and not because money suddenly became easier. Something changed inside the way they think, decide, risk, and react. That first $10,000 is psychologically different from the money that comes after it. The first few $1,000s aren't just income. They are proof. Proof that someone will pay you. Proof that you can create value. Proof that your decisions can produce a result outside your salary, your parents, your school, your boss, or whatever system you were depending on before. And that's exactly why starting can feel harder than finishing. Because when you're starting, you're not only trying to make money, you're trying to convince yourself that you are capable of making money. Those are two completely different battles. A person who has already made $100,000 can look at a new opportunity and think, I know I can make money. I just need to figure out how. A person trying to make their first $10,000 often thinks something much heavier. What if I'm wrong? What if nobody pays me? What if I waste 6 months? What if people laugh at me? What if I try everything and still end up with nothing? That uncertainty has a price, and most people underestimate how expensive it is. Because the first obstacle isn't always lack of opportunity. Sometimes it's the discomfort of acting before you have evidence that the action will work. That's where the psychology of the first $10,000 begins. Picture someone sitting at a desk late at night. They've watched dozens of videos. They've saved business ideas. They've written plans. They know about freelancing. They know about content. They know about digital products. They know people are making money online. They may even know exactly what they should do tomorrow. But tomorrow arrives. And instead of sending the first message, they watch another video. Instead of publishing the first piece of work, they improve the logo. Instead of asking someone to pay, they redesign the website. It looks like preparation, but sometimes it's fear wearing a productive costume. Because preparation feels safe. Execution doesn't. When you're preparing, nobody can reject you. Nobody can tell you your work isn't good enough. Nobody can ignore your message. Nobody can say no. The moment you put something into the real world, the possibility of rejection becomes real. And that changes everything. Your brain is remarkably good at protecting you from uncertainty. It doesn't care that building a business could improve your life. It cares that failure might hurt. So it searches for safer activities, research, planning, learning, comparing, waiting. You can spend 6 months preparing for something that could have been tested in 6 days. And the frustrating part is that the person often believes they are being responsible. They're not lazy, they're scared. There's a difference. The first $10,000 exposes that difference. Because at some point information stops being the problem. You already know enough. Now you have to act without certainty. That is uncomfortable. And most people try to remove the discomfort before they move. They wait until they feel confident. But confidence usually doesn't arrive first. Evidence does. You send the message. Someone replies. You make the sale. You deliver the work. Someone pays again. You make another sale. Little by little, your brain starts collecting evidence. I can do this. That sentence sounds simple. But psychologically, it can change the entire game. The first $100 might not change your lifestyle. The first $1,000 might not change your lifestyle either. But it can change your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is trying to make money. You start seeing yourself as someone who can create money. That distinction matters. Because people behave differently when an outcome becomes part of their identity. A person who thinks, I'm trying to become a freelancer, can quit after a few rejections. A person who thinks, I'm a freelancer, may still get rejected. But rejection no longer proves that the entire idea was wrong. It becomes part of the job. That's one reason the first $10,000 can take so long. You're building two things at once: income and identity. And identity is slower. Money gives you feedback, but it also gives you emotional information. Your first client teaches you that strangers can trust you. Your first repeat customer teaches you that your value wasn't an accident. Your first difficult customer teaches you that earning money also means handling problems. Your first month where you make more than expected teaches you that your previous financial ceiling wasn't a law. And then something even more important happens. You stop treating every dollar as an emergency. When you have $50, losing $30 feels enormous. When you have $5,000, losing $30 is annoying. When you have $50,000, losing $30 is almost invisible. The amount matters. Scarcity changes attention. When money is tight, every decision can feel urgent. You start thinking about the immediate problem. How do I pay this? How do I make this sale? How do I get through this month? That kind of thinking can be useful in an emergency, but it can make long-term decisions harder. You choose what pays quickly instead of what compounds. You take the easiest client instead of the right client. You chase small opportunities because they feel safer. You keep jumping between ideas because one failed week feels unbearable. The first $10,000 is often a fight against this short-term pressure. And there is another problem. People tend to overestimate how much they need to know before they begin. This is one of the quiet traps of modern learning. There is always another course, another book, another podcast, another expert, another strategy, another tool. You can learn forever. And learning feels like progress because your mind receives a reward for discovering something new. But information without exposure to reality can become entertainment. The market doesn't care how many videos you watched. A customer doesn't pay because you understand the theory. They pay because you solved a problem they care about. That is a painful lesson because reality is much less flattering than theory. Your first offer might be ignored. Your first video might get 37 views. Your first product might sell 0 copies. Your first pitch might sound awkward. Your first client might ask questions you never expected. And none of that means you failed. It means you finally received real information. This is where many people make a dangerous mistake. They interpret a small negative result as a statement about themselves. Nobody bought it, so they think I'm not good at this. A better interpretation is much less emotional. Nobody bought it. That's it. Now you have a question. Why? Maybe the offer was unclear. Maybe the audience was wrong. Maybe the price was wrong. Maybe nobody trusted you yet. Maybe the problem wasn't painful enough. Maybe the presentation was weak. Maybe you simply didn't reach enough people. Each explanation leads to a different experiment. But if you turn every failed experiment into an identity crisis, you stop experimenting. And without experiments, there is no learning. Without learning, there is no improvement. And without improvement, the first $10,000 stays far away. There is another psychological trap that makes the beginning especially difficult: comparison. You open your phone and see someone claiming they made $10,000 in a week. Someone else says they built a business at 19. Someone else shows a luxury apartment. Someone else posts a screenshot of a payment. And suddenly your $200 month feels embarrassing. But you're comparing your first chapter to someone else's highlight reel. More importantly, you're comparing outcomes without seeing the invisible years underneath them. You don't see their failed products. You don't see the clients who rejected them. You don't see the months where they made nothing. You don't see the skills they built before the result became visible. The internet compresses time. It makes people believe success happened suddenly because the final result is the only part being shown. That creates a strange psychological effect. You begin thinking you are behind. And once you believe you're behind, you become desperate to catch up. Desperation creates bad decisions. You chase shortcuts. You change direction too quickly. You buy things you don't need. You jump into opportunities you don't understand. You abandon a good strategy because it didn't produce results. In 2 weeks, the person isn't failing because they lack ambition. They're failing because their emotional clock is moving faster than reality. The first $10,000 rarely rewards impatience. It rewards staying in the game long enough to get better. And staying in the game is harder than it sounds. Because there will be long stretches where nothing seems to happen. You might work for 30 days and have very little to show. That period is psychologically dangerous. Humans are drawn toward visible rewards. If you put in effort and immediately receive money, your brain understands the connection: effort, reward, repeat. But when you work for weeks with little feedback, the connection becomes harder to feel. You start questioning whether the effort matters. This is why small wins are important. Not because you need constant motivation, but because evidence keeps the brain engaged. The first $50 matters. The first customer matters. The first positive review matters. The first person who comes back matters. These aren't just financial events. They're signals, and signals reduce uncertainty. The person who earns their first $10,000 has usually collected hundreds of tiny signals along the way. A better offer, a better conversation, a better sales call, a better piece of work, a better understanding of the customer. Eventually, the process becomes less mysterious. And when something stops being mysterious, it becomes easier to repeat. That explains another strange phenomenon. The first $10,000 can feel impossibly difficult. Then the next $10,000 feels noticeably easier. Not easy, just familiar. You know where customers come from. You know what people are willing to pay for. You know what mistakes cost money. You know what to ignore. You know what your own weak points look like. You have data. Before that, you were guessing. And guessing is exhausting. This is why the first $10,000 is often less about discovering a perfect strategy and more about reducing uncertainty. Every sale removes a little uncertainty. Every failure removes a little uncertainty too. Every conversation teaches you something. You are slowly building a map. At the beginning, there is no map. There is only a blank page, and a blank page creates fear. Once you have a few marks on it, moving forward becomes easier. But there is one final psychological shift that changes the relationship. With money, you stop asking, how can I make $10,000, and you start asking, what process could reliably produce $10,000? That sounds like a small change in wording. It isn't. The first question is about an outcome. The second is about a system. If you need $10,000 and have no system, every day becomes a new emergency. You need a client, you need a sale, you need a viral video, you need a lucky break. But if you know that 10 customers paying $1,000 gets you there, the problem becomes different. If you know that 20 clients paying $500 gets you there, different again. If you know that 100 customers paying $100 gets you there, different again. The number stops looking like a mountain. It becomes a collection of transactions, and psychologically, smaller problems are easier to approach. This is one reason people often struggle with big financial goals. The number is emotionally loud. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. It sounds like a wall. But businesses don't experience money as one giant number. They experience it through customers, offers, invoices, projects, products, transactions, one person, then another, then another. The first $10,000 is built in pieces. And those pieces teach you something that no motivational speech can teach. Money is not a personality test. A slow month doesn't mean you're incapable. A rejection doesn't mean you're worthless. A failed product doesn't mean you are a failure. A small beginning doesn't predict the size of the ending. The market gives feedback. You decide what that feedback means. That decision becomes important because the early stage of any financial journey is full of moments that can be interpreted in different ways. A customer says no. One person sees rejection. Another sees missing information. A video gets no views. One person sees proof they aren't talented. Another sees a piece of content that didn't work. A product gets no sales. One person quits. Another changes the offer. Same event, different interpretation, different future. That is why the psychology of the first $10,000 matters so much. The money is real, but the internal changes are even more important. You become less afraid of asking, less afraid of selling, less afraid of being ignored, less afraid of starting badly. You learn that awkward beginnings are normal. You learn that most people aren't watching you nearly as closely as you imagined. You learn that embarrassment fades. You learn that rejection is survivable. You learn that a bad month is not the end of the story. And slowly, the thing that once felt impossible becomes ordinary. That might be the most important part. Because success often doesn't feel like becoming a completely different person. It feels like becoming less surprised by your own ability. The first $10,000 is hard because every step is unfamiliar. You're learning how to create value. You're learning how to communicate it. You're learning how to charge for it. You're learning how to handle rejection. You're learning how to manage money once it arrives. And underneath all of that, you're learning whether you can trust yourself to keep moving when there is no guarantee. That's why starting can be harder than finishing. At the beginning, you have almost no evidence. Near the end, you have momentum. At the beginning, every mistake feels like a verdict. Later, mistakes become information. At the beginning, you need confidence to act. Later, your actions have already created enough evidence to produce confidence. And somewhere between the first awkward sale and the first time, you look at your account and realize you've crossed $10,000. Something changes. The number itself may not feel magical. You still have bills, you still have problems, you still have uncertainty. But the story in your head is different. You once needed someone to tell you it was possible. Now you have proof, and proof is quiet. It doesn't need motivation. It doesn't need a quote on a wall. It doesn't need someone online telling you to believe in yourself. You sent the offer, someone paid. You did it again, then again, and eventually, the number that once looked impossibly far away became a number you had actually reached. That is what makes the first $10,000 so difficult. You're not simply earning money. You're crossing a psychological border. Before it, you're wondering whether you can. After it, you know that you can. And that knowledge is worth far more than the number on the screen. Because once you've learned how to turn uncertainty into action, action into value, and value into money, the next mountain doesn't look quite as tall. You still have to climb it. But now you know what climbing feels like. And you no longer need to imagine what the other side looks like. You've already been there once.